On the anniversary of his daughter's death, a lonely millionaire visits her grave as he does every year. But this time, he finds a simple man crying beside a little girl who places colourful pebbles on the headstone. When he looks at the child, something inside him breaks. She has the same gaze as the daughter he lost. What he discovers is astonishing. Chapter 1. The silence that echoes. The morning silence in the Manhattan penthouse was as cold as the marble floors beneath Robert Harrison's feet. At 62, he commanded respect in every boardroom from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, his Harrison Industries empire spanning 3 continents. Yet in his luxury apartment overlooking Central Park, he felt smaller than ever. 10 years. 10 years since that terrible October evening when his world crumbled in a single phone call. 10 years since he had to identify his daughter Sarah's belongings at Mount Sinai Hospital, her bright smile forever frozen in his memory. 10 years of carrying a guilt so heavy it had turned his heart to stone. Robert poured black coffee from his espresso machine, a routine as mechanical as everything else in his life had become. The morning. Reports lay untouched on his counter. Today was different. Today was October 15th. He dressed in his charcoal suit, the same one he wore every year on this date. The drive to Woodlawn Cemetery took 45 minutes, giving him time to rehearse words he would never say aloud. Words of apology to a daughter who could no longer hear them. Sarah had been 25 when the accident happened. 25 years of missed birthdays because of business trips. 25 years of cancelled dinners because of board meetings. 25 years of her trying to earn his attention while he chased profit margins. The cemetery gate stood open, welcoming visitors to peaceful grounds dotted with oak trees dressed in autumn colors. Robert parked his Mercedes beside the familiar path to Section J, Row 15. He knew the way by heart. But something was different this time. As he approached Sarah's grave, a simple black granite headstone that read, Sarah Michelle Harrison, beloved daughter, he saw he wasn't alone. A man sat on the small bench nearby, his head buried in his hands. He appeared to be in his early 30s, wearing a worn denim jacket and jeans that had seen better days. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Robert hesitated, unsure whether to intrude on this stranger's grief. Then he noticed the small figure beside the bench. A little girl, no more than 9 years old, was carefully placing colorful painted stones around Sarah's headstone. Her dark hair caught the morning sunlight, and when she looked up briefly, Robert's breath caught in his throat. Those eyes, that delicate curve of the nose, the way she tilted her head when concentrating. It was as if he was looking at Sarah as a child. "Excuse me," Robert said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The man looked up, revealing tear-stained cheeks and eyes red with grief. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone else would be here so early." "This is my daughter's grave," Robert managed to say, his throat constricting around the words. The man's face went pale. He quickly stood up, placing a protective hand on the little girl's shoulder. You're Robert Harrison." The way the stranger said his name carried a weight Robert couldn't identify. Not the usual recognition that came with being featured on Forbes covers, but something deeper, more personal. "How do you know who I am?" Robert asked. The man looked down at the child who had stopped arranging her stones and was watching both men with curious eyes. "Lily, sweetie, why don't you go see if you can find some more pretty leaves for Mommy Sarah's garden?" Mommy Sarah. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. The little girl nodded and skipped toward a nearby maple tree, humming softly to herself. "My name is David Chen," the man said, his voice steadying. I was with Sarah when she—" Robert felt the ground shift beneath him. "What do you mean you were with her?" David ran a hand through his dark hair, struggling to find the right words. "Mr. Harrison, there's something you need to know. Something Sarah never got the chance to tell you herself." The morning air suddenly felt too thin. Robert gripped the back of the bench for support. "Tell me what?" "Lily is Sarah's daughter. She's your granddaughter." The words echoed in Robert's mind like thunder in a canyon. Granddaughter. Sarah had a child with this man he'd never met, never even knew existed. That's impossible, Robert whispered, though even as he said it he could see Sarah's features clearly reflected in the little girl's face. David pulled out his wallet and withdrew a small photograph. With trembling hands, he showed Robert a picture of Sarah holding a newborn baby, her face radiant with joy he'd never seen before. "She was afraid to tell you, afraid you wouldn't approve of me, of us." Robert stared at the photograph, his vision blurring. Sarah looked happy in a way he'd never managed to make her feel. "When was this taken?" 2 months before the accident. Lily had just been born. David's voice cracked. "Sarah wanted to introduce us properly, but she kept saying she was waiting for the right moment. She was terrified of disappointing you again." Again. The word cut deep because it was true. How many times had he made his daughter feel like she wasn't enough? How many times had his criticism disguised as concern made her retreat into herself? "Where have you been?" Robert asked, his business instincts kicking in. "Where has she been all these years?" "I've been raising her alone," David said simply. "After Sarah passed, I moved us to Queens. I work construction, do what I can to provide for her. We come here every year on this day because Lily likes to bring her mommy presents." Robert watched as Lily carefully arranged orange and red maple leaves around the headstone, creating a colourful border around her painted stones. She worked with such care, such love, whispering softly to the granite as if Sarah could hear her. "She talks to her," David continued, following Robert's gaze. "Tells her about school, about her friends, about the drawings she makes. Sometimes I think Sarah really is listening." "Why didn't you come to me?" Robert's voice was barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me I had a granddaughter?" David's jaw tightened slightly. "Because Sarah told me about the kind of man you were, always working, always distant. She said you showed love through money, not presents. I didn't want that for Lily." The accusation hung between them like a bridge neither man wanted to cross. Robert knew it was true, but hearing it from this stranger who had loved his daughter in ways he'd never learned how to stung more than any business rival's attack. "Grandpa!" Both men turned. Lily was running toward them, her arms full of leaves, a bright smile on her face. But she stopped short when she realized she had their full attention. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to call you that. David says I shouldn't talk to strangers." Robert's heart nearly stopped. Grandpa. She had called him Grandpa as naturally as if she'd known him her whole life. David knelt beside her. "Lily, this is a very special person. This is your mommy's daddy." Lily's eyes went wide. "Mommy Sarah's daddy? But you're so old." Despite everything, Robert found himself smiling for the first time in months. "I suppose I am pretty old." "Do you miss Mommy Sarah too?" Lily asked with the direct honesty that only children possess. "Every single day," Robert whispered, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt the truth of those words, not as pain, but as love. Lily considered this seriously, then walked over to him and placed one of her maple leaves in his hand. "This is for you, because missing someone means you love them a lot." Robert looked down at the small red leaf in his palm, preserved by the cool morning air. In 9 years of existing, this little girl had understood something about grief that had eluded him for a decade. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. David watched this exchange with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "Lily, why don't you show your grandfather the special stone you painted for Mommy?" Lily brightened and ran to retrieve a smooth river rock painted with a bright yellow sun and the word love in careful childish letters. "I painted it myself. Yellow is Mommy's favorite color because David told me she loved sunshine." Robert accepted the painted stone with reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts. "It's beautiful, Lily. Absolutely beautiful." "Do you want to help me arrange them?" she asked, already tugging on his suit jacket sleeve. "Mommy Sarah likes it when her garden looks pretty." Robert looked to David, who gave a small nod of permission. Together, grandfather and granddaughter knelt by Sarah's grave, placing stones and leaves in patterns that seemed to make perfect sense to Lily. "Tell me about your mommy," Robert said softly as they worked. "David says she was the most beautiful lady in the whole world, and she sang songs that made people happy, Lily said, concentrating on placing a blue stone just right. And she painted pictures of butterflies and flowers. Do you want to see? See what, sweetheart? Lily looked up at David, who hesitated before nodding again. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small sketchbook, its pages worn from years of careful handling. Sarah drew these while she was pregnant, David explained, pictures of what she imagined her daughter would look like, what they would do together. Robert opened the sketchbook with trembling hands. Page after page of delicate pencil drawings showed a woman and child playing in parks, reading books, baking cookies, laughing together. In the margins, Sarah had written, "Notes, teaching Lily to ride a bike. First day of school. Reading her favorite bedtime stories." Dreams. His daughter had filled these pages with dreams of motherhood, dreams of giving her child all the attention and love she herself had craved. She was going to be a wonderful mother, Robert whispered. She was, David said firmly. Even in just 2 months she was. She used to sing to Lily every night, these little made-up songs about being brave and kind and curious about the world. Lily looked up from her stone arranging. David sings them to me now, but his voice isn't as pretty as Mommy's was. "Hey!" David protested with mock offense, making Lily giggle. The sound of her laughter was like sunlight breaking through years of storm clouds. Robert realized he was witnessing something he'd thought impossible, joy growing from grief, love flourishing in the shadow of loss. "Mr. Harrison," David said carefully, "I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for anything from you. Lily and I, we've built a good life together. It's simple, but it's filled with love. I don't want that disrupted by money," Robert finished, "by the things that drove my daughter away from me in the first place." David nodded. "I've seen what your kind of wealth can do to families. I won't let it happen to Lily." "My kind of wealth," Robert repeated, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "You mean the kind that costs children their parents? The kind that builds empires but destroys hearts?" The truth hung between them like morning mist, visible but untouchable. Robert had spent 40 years accumulating power, only to discover that the most precious thing in his world, his relationship with his daughter, had been the price of his success. "I want to know her," Robert said suddenly. "I want to know my granddaughter. Not as Robert Harrison the businessman, but as the grandfather she already seems to think I am." David studied his face for a long moment. "And what makes you think you've changed enough to be the kind of grandfather she deserves?" The question hit its mark. Robert looked down at Lily, who was now humming while she worked, completely absorbed in creating beauty from simple things. What did he have to offer this perfect little being besides the wealth that had already cost him so much? "I don't know if I have," Robert admitted, "but I'd like the chance to try. I'd like to learn how to love the way Sarah loved, the way you love Lily." Something in his voice must have reached David, because the younger man's expression softened. "It won't be easy. I won't have Lily getting attached to someone who might disappear when business calls." "I understand. And no expensive gifts. No trying to buy her affection. She doesn't need a trust fund or private schools. She needs presence, consistency, genuine care." "I understand," Robert repeated, and for the first time in his life, he meant it completely. Lily looked up from her completed stone garden, her face glowing with pride. "Look, isn't it beautiful? Mommy Sarah is going to love it." Robert and David exchanged a glance over her head. In that moment, both men realized they were no longer strangers brought together by tragedy, but two people who loved the same little girl and were willing to learn how to love each other for her sake. "It's perfect, sweetheart," Robert said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Absolutely perfect." As they stood to leave, Lily slipped her hand into Robert's much larger one, with the easy trust that only children possess. "Will you come back next time too, Grandpa?" Robert looked down at her hopeful face, then across at David, who gave him the slightest nod. "Yes, Lily," Robert said, squeezing her hand gently. "I'll come back." And for the first time in 10 years, he meant it with his whole heart. Chapter 2. Hearts that Learn to Heal. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing morning at Woodlawn Cemetery. Robert sat in his penthouse office, but for the first time in years, the financial reports couldn't hold his attention. Instead, he found himself staring at a small painted stone that now held place of honor on his mahogany desk. Lily's sunshine stone with love written in careful childish letters. David had agreed to supervised visits in Central Park every Saturday afternoon. Nothing extravagant, just time on park benches watching Lily feed ducks and chase pigeons. Robert discovered that his granddaughter had inherited Sarah's artistic spirit, always carrying a small sketchbook to draw flowers, dogs, and people she found interesting. "Tell me about school, Lily," Robert said during their third visit, as they shared a bag of breadcrumbs by the pond. "Mrs. Rodriguez says I'm really good at art class," Lily beamed, pulling out her latest drawing, a family of stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "This is you, and this is me, and this is David, and this is Mommy Sarah watching us from the clouds." Robert's throat tightened as he studied the drawing. Even in stick figures, Lily had captured something profound about their unconventional family. David watched from a nearby bench, still maintaining careful distance but beginning to relax his guard. He saw how Robert listened to every word Lily said with the kind of attention that made children feel important. It was during their fourth visit that everything changed. "Mr. Harrison?" a woman's voice called from behind them. Robert turned to see a familiar figure approaching. Margaret Harrison, his ex-wife of 15 years. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her designer coat immaculate, but her eyes were red-rimmed with recent tears. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" "I hired a private investigator," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on Lily, who was blissfully unaware of the adult tension as she arranged twigs into patterns on the ground. After that article in the Herald last week, Robert's blood ran cold. "What article?" David immediately stood up, his protective instincts flaring. "What's going on?" Margaret pulled out her phone, showing them a gossip blog headline. "Billionaire's secret granddaughter. The Harrison family's best-kept secret." "No," David whispered, snatching the phone. The article included photos taken with a telephoto lens, Robert and Lily feeding ducks, David pushing her on swings, all of them laughing together in what they had thought was privacy. "Lily, sweetie, come here," David called, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Who's that, lady?" Lily asked, pointing at Margaret with characteristic directness. Margaret knelt down, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your grandmother, sweetheart. Your mommy Sarah was my baby girl." The revelation hit like lightning. Lily looked between the three adults, processing this information with the remarkable adaptability of children. "You're Mommy Sarah's mommy?" Lily asked. "Yes, I am. Are you sad too, like Grandpa Robert and David are sad?" Margaret nodded, unable to speak. "Do you want to see Mommy Sarah's stones?" Lily offered, pulling out her painted rock collection. "I make them pretty colors, so she won't be lonely." As Margaret examined Lily's artwork with wonder, David pulled Robert aside. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," David hissed. "Once the media gets involved, Lily's life becomes a circus. I won't let that happen to her." "We can handle this," Robert said desperately. "I can make calls, have the story kill. With what? Money, power. The same things that cost you Sarah in the first place." David's voice cracked with emotion. "I'm taking Lily home. We need time to think." "David, please. No, this was a mistake. I should have trusted my instincts." Robert watched helplessly as David gently coaxed Lily away from Margaret, explaining they needed to leave early. Lily's confused protests broke his heart. "But I want to show Grandma Margaret my duck drawing." "Another time, sweetheart," David said, lifting her into his arms. As they walked away, Lily called over David's shoulder. "Bye, Grandpa Robert. Bye, Grandma Margaret. See you next Saturday." But Robert feared there might not be a next Saturday. Margaret collapsed onto the bench beside him, sobbing. "I've lost her twice now, first Sarah and now her daughter." "We'll figure this out," Robert said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The next week was torture. Robert's calls to David went unanswered. He drove to the Queen's address David had reluctantly provided months earlier, but the small apartment stood empty. A neighbor mentioned they'd seen David and the little girl leaving with suitcases. Margaret called daily, her own grief and desperation matching his. "I never got to know Sarah as a mother," she would cry. "I'll never forgive myself if I lose this chance with Lily." It was Margaret who came up with the plan. "There's a place," she said during one of their increasingly frequent coffee meetings. "Sarah used to talk about it when she was little. A cabin upstate where she said she felt safest. I think David might have taken Lily there." The drive to the Catskill Mountains took 2 hours. The cabin sat nestled among pine trees, overlooking a small lake that reflected the autumn sky like a mirror. Robert's heart leaped when he saw David's old Honda parked beside the wooden structure. They found David and Lily sitting on the cabin's front porch. Lily was showing David how to braid grass into crowns, while he pretended to struggle with the simple task, making her giggle. "How did you find us?" David asked, his voice weary rather than angry. "Sarah used to dream about this place," Margaret said softly. "She drew pictures of it constantly as a child." Lily looked up from her grass braiding. "Grandpa Robert, Grandma Margaret, look what I'm teaching David." The adults' hearts broke a little at her uncomplicated joy in seeing them. "David," Robert said carefully, "we need to talk." That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep in the cabin's small bedroom, the three adults sat around the fireplace David had built. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows on their faces as they finally spoke the truths they'd been carrying. "I almost gave her up," David said suddenly, staring into the fire. "Right after Sarah passed, I was 26, working 2 jobs, living in a studio apartment barely big enough for one person. Lily would cry all night and I didn't know what I was doing. I was so scared I'd fail her." Margaret and Robert listened in stunned silence. "I went to the adoption agency," David continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Filled out all the paperwork, told myself she'd be better off with a real family, people who knew how to be parents." "What changed your mind?" Margaret asked gently. David smiled through his tears. "Sarah left me a letter. I found it tucked in Lily's baby book. She wrote it while she was pregnant, just in case something happened. It said, 'If you're reading this, then I'm not there to help you raise our daughter. But I know you can do it, David. Love her enough for both of us, and she'll teach you everything else you need to know.'" Robert felt his heart crack open. "She was right. Look what you've given her. Look at the person she's becoming." "But I can't protect her from this media attention," David said desperately. "I can't give her the security and privacy she deserves." "What if you didn't have to do it alone?" Margaret asked quietly. Both men looked at her. "What if we formed a real family? Not the kind built on money or obligation, but the kind built on love for the same little girl." Over the next hour, they hammered out an arrangement that honored everyone's needs. David would remain Lily's primary guardian, but Margaret and Robert would be genuine grandparents, present, supportive, but not overwhelming. They would pool their resources not to spoil Lily, but to protect her privacy and ensure her security. Most importantly, they would do it Sarah's way, with presence, not presence. The next morning, Lily woke to find all 3 adults making breakfast together. Margaret was teaching her how to flip pancakes, while Robert and David debated the merits of maple syrup versus honey. "Is this our new family?" Lily asked with the stunning clarity that only children possess. "If you want it to be," David said, kneeling beside her. Lily considered this seriously, then nodded. "I think Mommy Sarah would like this. She always wanted everyone to be happy together." 6 months later, they had established a rhythm. Weekday evenings were for David and Lily in their cozy Queens apartment, where homework was done at the kitchen table and bedtime stories were read by lamplight. Saturday mornings belonged to Margaret, who taught Lily to bake cookies and shared stories about Sarah's childhood. Sunday afternoons were Robert's time, spent in Central Park or the Natural History Museum, where Lily's endless questions helped him see the world through fresh eyes. The media eventually lost interest, moving on to newer scandals. But, more importantly, the family had learned to shield Lily from public attention, while still allowing her to grow up normally. It was during a family dinner at the cabin, now their regular monthly gathering place, that Lily made her announcement. "I'm going to be in the school art show," she said proudly, twirling spaghetti around her fork. Mrs. Rodriguez says my painting of our family is the best in second grade. What did you paint? Margaret asked. All of us holding hands in a circle with Mommy Sarah in the middle, even though she's invisible, because she's the reason we all found each other. Robert looked around the table at this unlikely family, Margaret with flour still on her apron from afternoon baking, David relaxed in a way Robert had never seen him before, and Lily chattering about art class and playground adventures. She's right, he said suddenly. Sarah brought us together. Even after she's gone, she's still taking care of all of us. David reached across the table and squeezed Robert's shoulder. She'd be proud of who you've become, you know. The grandfather you are to Lily, it's who Sarah always hoped you could be, Margaret raised her glass of lemonade. To Sarah, for teaching us that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. To Sarah, they echoed, including Lily, who giggled at being included in the grown-up toast. As the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Robert realized he had found something he'd spent 62 years searching for without knowing it. A family built not on success or achievement, but on simple, daily acts of love. Later that evening, as Lily fell asleep between her two grandparents on the cabin's big couch, David finishing the dishes in the kitchen, Robert understood that this moment, this quiet, perfect moment, it was worth more than every business deal he'd ever closed.